Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, students also, welcome to this webinar, a webinar jointly organized by the Leuven Center for Global Governance Studies, whose director I have the honor to be. I'm Jan Wouters, besides, and the EU Diplo project, which is a Jean Monnet network between the universities of Geneva with Professor Christine Cadus, Groningen with Professor Ramses Wessel, who is the coordinator, Leuven, myself, and Pisa, where our distinguished colleague Sarah Poli is in charge. It's co-funded under the Erasmus Plus program of the European Union. What is important to stress, and then I stop with a little publicity for EU Diplo, is that EU Diplo really focuses on the question what the constraints are, the internal and the external constraints for the European Union to further its ambitions as an international diplomatic actor, but also on the opportunities and the untapped potential that is still there, legally, politically, and so on, for the European Union to grow as an international diplomatic actor. Some of you who were in our previous webinar a few months ago will recall we had a webinar about the whole question of the spat, the diplomatic spat, between the United Kingdom and the European Union regarding the diplomatic treatment of the EU delegation in London. Well, the good news is yesterday the Financial Times reported that the two sides have found an agreement. So it's a nice way of going to the topic of today, which is a little bit different, but still, I would say, an incident or a spat, because it is about Sofagate. And the incident continues to simmer, even if it took place already, well, more or less a month ago. Because on the 7th of April this year, the Turkish president, Erdogan, received the president of the European Council, Charles Michel, and the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, for a high-level meeting in Ankara. And then, and many of you have seen it in pictures or on the video, in the room in which the meeting was to take place, there were only 2 chairs prepared for the 3 leaders. While Mr. Michel seated himself on the chair beside the Turkish president, Mrs. von der Leyen was offered a seat on a sofa across from the Turkish foreign minister. All the implications and meaning of these things will be explained in a few moments, but the incident gave rise to considerable criticism and prompted, besides a lively session in the European Parliament on Monday, the 26th of April. There's a lot you can say about this incident. There are many different dimensions. In our current webinar, we focus, as the title says, on the diplomatic, the legal, the political, and the protocol dimensions of the incident. And I'm proud to say we have actually together with us here 4 very distinguished experts in this area. Let me first very quickly introduce them to you. The very first person I would like to mention is Ambassador Jacques de Baenst, who is an ambassador. As I said, he's retired Belgian ambassador, I should say an ambassador of His Majesty the King of the Belgians, and an honorary Director General of the European Commission. He's also a visiting professor at the College of Europe in Bruges. I should stress the enormous expertise, I would say the unique expertise of Ambassador de Baenst, because first of all, he was Chief of Protocol at the Belgian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then he became the Director of the Protocol Service of the European Commission, which he did from 1998 till 2010. And when we say 2010, you will all, as experts in European Union law, know that this is already at the time that the Lisbon Treaty had entered into force. Mr. de Baenst did many other very interesting and important things while he was a Belgian diplomat. We're not going to mention that, but I should stress how delighted we are that he's participating in this seminar, because as you will also see from his presentation, which we will share with you, He has just a very unique expertise on issues on which many people really don't know how things are regulated, namely the whole protocol and the rules and customs in that respect. We'll come to that in a few moments. Let me first introduce the other speakers as well. We have Dr. Sanderijn Duquet, who is still in the process of joining us. She had a little bit of a connection issue, but we hope this can be solved very soon. We have Dr. Mauro, I should say Sanderijn is a diplomatic advisor of the Belgian State Secretary for Asylum and Migration. And she worked previously at the Belgian Permanent Mission to NATO in Brussels. Besides, Sanderijn, as many of you may know, has done a PhD at KU Leuven about the EU in international diplomatic law, so she's really one of the top experts in that field. Then we have Dr. Mauro Gatti, assistant professor in EU law at the University of Bologna, previously at the University of Luxembourg, at the Hague University of Applied Sciences, and a very prolific scholar and author in the area of EU external relations law, having notably also published a great book on the European External Action Service. Last but not least at all, because in fact he will be our first speaker, is Professor Steven van Hekke, who is my dear colleague at KU Leuven, where he is an associate professor in comparative and European Union politics. Very happy to also have you in our seminar, Steven. And that brings me to the actual topics of the seminar. We have tried to structure a little bit the discussions, and the following structure will more or less be followed. I suggest we first start with Professor Steven van Hekke for a short comment from a political perspective, starting from that probably apocryphal Kissinger question, the Henry Kissinger question, namely, which phone number should we dial when we want to speak to Europe's highest political representatives? And so indeed, Steven has written about the Sofagate incident, but he is a real top expert on European Union politics. So we would like him to deal with the question of this Sofagate incident from a political perspective. Then we will ask Dr. Mauro Gatti to give us a very brief, what I would call legal reality check from the viewpoint of European Union law. The whole question, besides, I already mentioned the Treaty of Lisbon, and the question is, yes, the institutional setup of the external representation of the European Union since the Treaty of Lisbon, is it really so complex? Is it really a kind of accident in the making almost, as some people have said? Especially, I would say, with regard to the level of representation of the presidents of the European Council and of the European Commission. So some guidance from the EU point of view, what the exact legal division of tasks is, and not only law in the books, but also law in practice, what the actual practice is in that respect. Think of high-level EU summits and meetings with third countries. I'm very happy to see that Dr. Sanderijn Duquet has joined us here. Good morning, Sanderijn. Great to have you in our webinar. We would like to ask her then to share with us how she sees the Sofagate incident from the perspective of international diplomatic law. Yeah? What are the international rules here? Because we are not only talking about the EU, we're talking about an international meeting. What are the international rules and customs on presidents, and how does the strange animal, which the European Union is still in international affairs, how does the EU fit into those international rules? Did President Erdogan, for instance, or his environment, did they actually respect those rules? Question. And then last but not least, Ambassador de Baenst, as already indicated, having a unique, truly unique expertise on protocol, especially at the European Union level. we ask him to share with us some critical reflections from a protocol point of view. So I think this will make for a very interesting webinar. We have 2 hours time, which is comfortable. We don't have to rush. The participants, and we are with a big group, we are more than 170 registered participants, are kindly asked to, if they have questions for the speakers, to put them on the chat box. And so after the presentations, we will hopefully go to a more interactive part. Needless to say, the panelists themselves are also absolutely free to comment upon each other. Now, let's go first to Professor Steven van Hekke for a short comment from a political perspective. Steven, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Jan. Thank you, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for having me and for being able to join this seminar. Indeed, as a political scientist, I will give a general overview of the topic of the day, so setting the scene, and hopefully kick off an interesting discussion with the other panelists as well as with the audience through the Q&A session. I prepared 10 speaking points, so if those students who want to take notes, I will try to make their lives a bit more easy. So my first point is indeed Henry Kissinger and his famous statement, question, who shall I call when I want to speak to Europe? Henry is alive and kicking, so far so good, but hopefully he did not call last month. Because indeed, we are still talking about Sofagate, and there are many good reasons for that. Second point, and dare I stay in the US, with Henry Kissinger. From the US politics, we know that all politics is local politics, and I think this is also the case here. What happened in Ankara was probably useful for President Erdogan for domestic purposes. See how brave I am, I'm not impressed by the EU, etc. But of course, since at least all of us, I mean, as far as the panelists are concerned, citizens of the EU, since we are all still talking about it, it also means, of course, that for us it's also local politics. In theory, it's international politics, but in practice, it's local politics. Because we are talking perhaps less about the impact on Turkish politics, but of course, we're also talking about to our domestic audiences. And this is particularly what was, for instance, going on during the debate in the European Parliament. This is an intra-European exercise, everyone talking to his or her audiences. Point 3, protocol is politics. So it's not just protocol, because protocol is politics. Remember when Vladimir Putin sent his dog to Angela Merkel. Remember when Donald Trump pushed away the Prime Minister of Montenegro at a NATO summit. This is also protocol and politics. It always means something, because we are talking about senior politicians. They are there because they should behave professional. And if they behave in a different way, it always has a political meaning. Whether they like it or not, protocol is politics. Perhaps I would have behaved different, or I would not have been able to behave at all, but that's why I'm a professor at KU Leuven and I'm not the president of the European Council. If you are president of the European Council, I'm sorry to say, then you need to know how to behave, because this is high-level politics and high-level protocol. Point 4, I don't think this is the one-person problem. So the problems in foreign affairs of the EU is often framed in the framework. There are too many voices, too many people. I don't think this is really the core of the problem. Also, within member states, you always have a minister of foreign affairs next to a prime minister or a head of state. There are always more people who talk on foreign issues or who speak on behalf of someone or something. That is not a problem. So that is not the uniqueness of the problem. The uniqueness, point 5, is the problem of hierarchy. We both have a president of the European Commission next to a president of the European Council. So I don't think this is the problem of the HR. So the High Representative, Josep Borrell, who already had an issue in Moscow, probably he's also very happy that he's not involved this time. For me, this is a problem of hierarchy. How are you going to combine two presidents who are in the same ranking order of protocol, who both need to speak on behalf of the EU. The competences, sorry, the division is not clear at all. Maybe it's not even possible to distinguish this at all from a political point of view. Maybe from a legal point of view, fine. We'll see later on this morning, but politically it's impossible because you always have at least two people. And therefore, because there are two, it's by definition an interinstitutional issue, because they are representing a different institution within the EU. So it also means not only a clash of strong personalities, who both of them think about their future career. Ursula von der Leyen perhaps already thinking about a second term. On the other hand, Charles Michel, he will retire if he gets his second half of the term. If he will retire as European Council President, he will only be 49 years old. So perhaps he's already thinking about becoming Secretary General of the UN. So we both have two persons, contrary to Juncker, to Van Rompuy, etc., who are not at the end of their career. Two strong personalities representing a different institution with different attitudes, different sensibilities, and therefore you have a clash. Point 6, I do think it's also a gender issue, because gender is also politics. It would have been an incident when the president of the Commission would be a man, for sure, but the incident is bigger because Ursula von der Leyen is a woman. So I fully agree with what she said in the European Parliament, especially because she was there to refer to the so-called Istanbul Convention, so the Treaty of the European Council on violation against women, families, etc. So for Erdogan, this was the perfect setup. Therefore, I think Ursula von der Leyen has the right to also refer to it as a gender issue. Point 8, it was also embarrassing because particularly this European Council President, but also the whole College of European Commissioners, called themselves to be ambitious in the area of geopolitics. Particularly at a moment where the EU is not entirely strong, the problems with the vaccination strategy, what is going to happen in Washington, problems with China, with Russia. Particularly on this very moment, there is a Turkish president who brings for them a very awkward situation. So this is really embarrassing and also probably a reality check for the geopolitical ambitions of the Commission as well as the President of the European Council. Point 8, why are we talking about this? Because everything is also communication. Everything comes together in this one particular picture. We probably forgot about all other incidents because there was just a gaffe or something went wrong and then it's fine. We go back to the order of the day, but not this time because we have an iconic view of everything that comes together. These two presidents related to a third country, which we have a very difficult situation, etc. So everything comes together. So this is an iconic view of the current state of EU affairs, and therefore it's perfectly right after 1 month to still talk about it, because there are many dimensions that come together in this one particular view. Then 9 and 10 are a bit more positive. Luckily, there is the Lisbon Treaty, and let me be very bold. As we all know, the Lisbon Treaty allows to combine the functions of the President of the European Commission and the European Council. I did not say then we will enter paradise, but at least the issue of hierarchy would then be solved. If we find a good candidate to compose these two positions in 2024, you have my support. Number 10, of course, the member states would never easily agree on that because they want to control both the nomination of the President of the European Commission, therefore they're not happy with the Spitzenkandidaten process, but certainly they are not willing to give in yet on their decision to appoint the President of the European Council. But luckily there we have a conference on the future of Europe, so I would call on everyone to suggest to the citizens agoras who will take place in the autumn, but also to the plenary sessions, to all the politicians, all the citizens, to propose the combination of T2's positions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stefan, for a very rich introduction. And let me immediately take issue with your last point, because you seem to be in favor of this merger, which indeed I think legally is possible under the Lisbon Treaty. The question is it desirable? And there, if it's desirable, is it something which we really want? And let me just very briefly mention that the President of the Commission is, of course, on top of a community-based method institution. Is it desirable that this function is being combined with a function in a very intergovernmental setting as the European Council? Would that not be a little bit the Trojan horse conquering the Berlaymont? But it's a question, and maybe our other panelists or other people in the webinar could further discussion about that. So there we are. Thank you very much for this political dimensions that you described. We now go to the legal side, and we start with EU law. And so I would like to kindly ask Dr. Mauro Gatti to give us this, what we call the legal reality check from the viewpoint of EU law. Mauro, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Jan. I will try to answer both your question and the issue raised by Professor Van Eyck regarding the issue of hierarchy between the presidents. So, are the constitutional arrangements of external representation an accident in the making? Well, in my view, this is not an insurmountable problem, either in theory or in practice. I will even suggest a practical solution to avoid other incidents such as Sofagate, a practical solution that does not involve the merging of the two presidents of the EU. So let's start with the theory. To understand what happened in Ankara, I think that we have to take into account the whole picture, quite literally. In the room that day in Ankara, there were 4 people, so the two presidents of the Union, Erdogan, and his foreign minister. What is remarkable in my view is that the foreign minister of Turkey was sitting on a sofa, just like von der Leyen. In this way, the arrangement suggested that there were persons in the room that had the level of head of state and government, Erdogan and Michel, and 2 persons that had a lower level, a subordinate level, von der Leyen and the foreign minister of Turkey. This arrangement is clearly inconsistent with EU law, I believe, as you can gather by looking at Articles 15 and 17 of the Treaty on European Union. Article 15, paragraph 6 of the TEU expressly stipulates, I quote, that the President of the European Council shall, at his level, which is intended as at the level of head of state and government, he shall represent the Union on issues concerning the common foreign and security policy. What does this imply? This implies that he can speak about some topics, the CFSP, but not about others. So there must be someone else that speaks at the level of head of state and government regarding all other topics, such as migration or trade or the Istanbul Convention. Who's this somebody? That's, of course, the European Commission, and more precisely, the President of the European Commission, as can be gathered by looking at Article 17 TEU, which stipulates that, with the exception of the common foreign and security policy, the Commission ensures the Union's external representation. So, all in all, the President of the European Commission does speak at the level of head of state and government and has the same level as the President of the European Council from the perspective of EU constitutional law. I guess that Ambassador de Banst will further explore this topic from the perspective of protocol. But for the time being, I will just focus on the law. As for, this is the theory, but what about the practice? Well, the practice confirms the theory. I have analyzed the pictures from the summits between the EU and third states since 2014. And I have to say that the two presidents were systematically placed on the same level, symbolically. So they always spoke from podiums, sat in comparable positions at tables, and of course, they sat on chairs when need be, as in the case of meetings with Japanese leaders, Canadian leaders, and of course, meetings with Turkish the Turkish president. It happened 3 times between 2015 and 2017, in Ankara, in Brussels, and even in China on the side of a G20. So everybody applies the rules that derive from the EU treaties. In a way, everybody knows how things should work, including third states, including Turkey. It is even more remarkable that when you have ministers participating in the meetings, those ministers do not appear in pictures, at least not in the big final group pictures. And in the rare cases when they actually do, they are always placed on a subordinate position compared to the heads of government and state, including the 2 presidents of the Union. So, for instance, in the occasion of a meeting in 2016 between Ukrainian and European Union leaders, you had the 2 presidents of the Union and the president of Turkey, Poroshenko, in the back standing, and then you have in the front a minister from Turkey and a commissioner, Sofogate, who were sitting and signing a treaty. You have other examples like this, where you have a clear distinction between the presidents, heads of government and state, and ministers. For instance, you might have situations when you have presidents on one side of the table, then you have a hiatus, and on the other side you have the ministers. So from an aesthetical perspective, let's say, the arrangements tend to always show that ministers and heads of state and government are separate. In this way, the practical arrangements confirm EU constitutional law. And they confirm that not only EU institutions, but also third states are perfectly aware of the requirements set by EU constitutional law. So why did Sofagate happen anyway, even if everybody knows how things should work? I can only imagine that Turkish authorities were in bad faith. They wanted to embarrass the EU and distract attention from substantive issues, such as the Istanbul Convention. I think that Dr. Duque will explore this topic more later. But what about the EU side? Well, I think that the problem on the EU side is that the Union has 2 protocol services, 2 main protocol services, one in the Commission and one in the Council. And these institutions, as Professor Van Hecke mentioned earlier, have different interests, different views. In this case, the protocol of the Commission was possibly negligent because it did not perform sufficient investigation of the situation, sufficient contact with Turkish authorities. I think that this topic will be explored later. And maybe the Council protocol was either negligent or in bad faith or both. But certainly, there was a lack of coordination between the 2. And lack of coordination was part of the problem. So how do you solve this? How do you avoid this kind of coordination problems in the future? The coordination solution that has already been mentioned is to merge the 2 presidents. But that is very difficult to do in practice for political reasons. I think that there is a more practical, easier to implement solution, and that is to approach the topic not from the constitutional perspective, but from the administrative one. Instead of merging the 2 presidents, I think that the European Union should think about merging the protocol services, or at least create a protocol service that coordinates the different protocol services. This is something that is not unprecedented. States already have this kind of arrangement. In Italy, for instance, the ceremonial service of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs organizes all visits abroad for all Italian officials. Although it is part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it also organizes visits of the President of the Republic. Something like this can also be performed at the level of the European Union. Of course, this centralized protocol service should sit with the External Action Service. It goes without saying. That's precisely the reason why the External Action Service was created, coordinating the foreign policies of the Union. The External Action Service would be an ideal solution for both the Council and the Commission, or not so bad solution at least, insofar as it is relatively independent from both. And insofar as the External Action Service also contains the EU delegations, so can also ensure coordination on the spot, which was also a problem in this case, probably. And the most interesting part of this solution that I propose is that it does not require any modification of treaties and probably not even a modification of secondary law. So it can be performed quite easily and fast. So in my view, all in all, I don't think that we have a huge constitutional problem, and this problem can be easily solved with administrative solutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Mauro, for sharing your legal expertise with us. You made some very, very interesting points, I think. I liked your point about the kind of merging of protocol services. I have a little legal question for you, but that's just to make you reflect a little bit while the other colleagues are speaking. You mentioned Articles 15 and 17 of the treaty, but to be very honest, the treaties themselves do not say something very specifically about, let's say, the Commission President. At his level and in that capacity, clause of Article 15 applies only to the European Council President. I would say it's interesting also to note that at the level of secondary law, you have the EEAS Council decision, of course, which is referring to the President of the European Commission as almost a kind of autonomous external relations player. So, I mean, there is all kinds of interesting legal things to argue, but I would like you, since you spoke at the level of constitutional law, I would like to know what basis we do have at the level of primary law with regard to the equal status of the President of the Commission. It's just a legalistic question, but to keep the lawyers busy. And in the meantime, I'm welcoming again Dr. Sandrine Duquet. I hope that the internet connection is now stable, dear Sandrine. And I'm going to give you the floor, Sandrine, in a moment. But may I also interject in our discussions yet another little incident that happened in the meantime, also in April after Sofagate. And in fact, in that little incident, it is Ursula von der Leyen, which is in the hot seat, facing questions about diplomatic protocol, because it was about breaching protocol in rejecting an invitation of the President of Ukraine for the visit to commemorate, the independence of Ukraine all those years. It's not something that is the subject of today's webinar, but apparently in recent times, those protocol issues seem to pop up from time to time. I wonder for Mr. De Baenst whether this is a recent thing and whether this also happened during his time of tenure, but that's an issue to be discussed later. But so now, please, Sandrine, can you enlighten us with regard to the Sofagate incident from the perspective of international diplomatic law? You have the floor.
Many thanks, Chair, and my apologies for having had some connection problems. Apparently, the cyber attack that hit the Belgian government also shut off our Wi-Fi. So I'm on a rather unstable connection, but I hope everything will be fine for the next 5 to 7 minutes. I'll focus my intervention on 3 points. I'll start with some general brief words on the importance of protocol in international relations. And in doing so, I'll try to make some remarks on the current precedence rules in the EU and Sofagate. And I'll also focus towards the end of the presentation a bit on what went wrong on the EU side and are the Turks to blame, something that previous speakers have also hinted to. So, but let's start with reminding perhaps the audience just how much importance is attached by diplomats and by others to protocol. It's not something that people take lightly in the diplomatic world, and international courtesy is actually one of the foundations. Protocol arrangements have always been very, very central when representatives were meeting each other around the world. And then, as was shown by Sophogate, a seating or a title error is not just a regretful event. It goes beyond that. It's not just a diplomatic error, but it can even result in more serious diplomatic tensions. And this was shown by Sophogate, and in the same way, it was not, because actually the focus was not so much on the relations between the EU and Turkey. It was discussed, but actually the most of the discussion was in the internal side of things, on how the EU was coping with Sofagate, rather than how it impacted international relations. But how then should we qualify all those protocol rules, certain norms in international law? So we all know that there are certain formalities, international politeness, that should not be broken, that are very serious. But what is the international legal status of such norms? That is a much more difficult question to answer, because perhaps surprisingly so, there is no international treaty on protocol. And even the most important conventions on diplomacy, let's take the 1961 Vienna Convention, only briefly touch upon these issues. There are certain rules that have to do with precedents and so on, but it's not that a whole body of law has emerged from these practices. Actually, and if we look at these rules, we see that when conventions do talk about protocol, they try to overcome certain discrepancies between national traditions, just with the aim of protecting the principle of equality between states. So the Vienna Convention, for example, leaves concrete questions of international etiquette and to general practice, and then with not so much of a clear legal status. So in the absence of the international norms, what is then the status of protocol? In itself, I think it's more of a sort of institutional behavior that you see on the international field. And this behavior may even change a bit and then be a bit different from one state to another. So this is one of the problems I think the EU is facing. It can also not just sign up to a set of rules. The matter is a bit more complicated. Yet, on the other hand, we see that the Union is no stranger to diplomatic protocol or customs, and that actually a practice has also emerged over the years. And then both in its active and its passive diplomatic practices, you see that the EU does have a general understanding of these informal rules and does abide by those. I think in most of the practice and then diplomatic delegations around the world, the EU actually abides very well with these protocol rules and blends in rather well. It's more these kind of very mediatized encounters that are perhaps a bit of the exception to a practice that is much more stable, I think, than what people generally perhaps believe it is. One of the reasons that the EU too attaches great importance to protocol is precisely that in diplomatic practice, it tries to blend in perfectly with states. So that is the idea of equality, and then in a way, protocol is intended to create a certain shared sense of belonging between sending and receiving states, within international relations. And I'd like to zoom in on two specific difficulties for the EU when doing so. So firstly, and I've talked about this before, in its essence, protocol ensures equality. It's the expression of the idea that representatives are on an equal footing and that they deserve mutual respect. Historically, of course, this was between states, which perhaps explains some of the struggles that the EU still has with questions of protocol. It's not a state, and especially its setup doesn't particularly compare to that of a state. It does not have a head of state that is as clearly defined as in state practice. There's no clear Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it only has institutions that are legally on equal terms, and this gives the EU a certain disadvantage in diplomacy, and it's one of those questions that always will pop up in discussions on the diplomatic practice of the EU is how it compares to states and whether, in fact, it deserves a seat at the table. But in essence, these problems are more internal to the EU than I think that they are external. And this makes incidents such as Sofagate even more regrettable, in my opinion. Because if the idea is that the EU should blend in, every time the attention shifts on how different the EU is from states, the EU loses in a way, and it presents itself weaker than it should be. And secondly, another challenge may be that the questions of protocol are generally considered being part of the playing field of protocol service of foreign ministries around the world, as a previous speaker also explained. And you see that the institutions all having their own protocol services that as long as these different protocol surfaces exist, that problems will pop up because there's a certain competition then that is also exposed. I must say that, of course, the EAS already has a protocol surface and it has clear guidelines. And when I did check the guidelines before speaking in the seminar, and the EAS guidelines clearly say that during external visits, the President of the European Council takes precedence over the Commission President. So there is a certain rule. So in a way, it's understandable that the team that was advising Charles Michel also very literally interpreted those rules that do exist, in fact. But finally, looking at the incident themselves, which probably is a regrettable coincidence of circumstances. If I had to judge what went wrong, I think the lack of preparation, certainly also partly because of COVID, of course, the fact that not all representatives were able to check the room on beforehand. This is certainly a factor, but on the other hand, a more mature diplomatic actor would have probably sent the EU delegation, the diplomatic service, the diplomatic representation in the country itself to check the room, and wouldn't leave it to different protocol services advising, in fact, the institutions or the presidents. And then I do think if the EU would be taking its legal, its diplomatic representations more serious, it would have used the delegations to do this and to perform these normal tasks that diplomatic missions are out to perform. And then secondly, the balance of power between the institutions that seems to be very much alive, perhaps more so than when we thought they were. And I'd like to point to two golden rules in diplomacy. And first one is that a diplomatic actor should always avoid showing internal discrepancies. And then this really makes the incident very regrettable. And secondly, the stress should always be on the message and not on the actor. So twice the union failed here. And then when we're thinking about how to solve this, there's some suggestions were made by the previous speakers. But I also wonder whether the institutions, especially in external relations, are also not bound by some kind of rule of sincere cooperation. So the institutions and the EU demands this sincere cooperation from the member states in external relations. So sometimes resulting in the fact that member states do not take the floor in international organizations and so on. So this has quite far extensive consequences sometimes, this rule of sincere cooperation, but why would that not exist between the institutions themselves, to that they are loyal and that they should manage to coordinate on beforehand. So a final question then, perhaps, are the Turks to blame? And perhaps here I'm a bit more provocative, but I believe not. I do think that it was up to the EU to get itself organized, and it's in these external relations. It's not up to the other actor to know. Although, of course, we all know that the Turks are very well aware how the EU works, probably, but it's up to the EU to make sure that it doesn't shoot itself in its own foot, so to speak. So. Finally, I do think that this incident was a learning experience, and I would doubt that this will happen again, especially in external relations. The institutional competition will probably not have faded away, but I do hope that in presenting itself as a diplomatic actor, the EU can be a bit more mature in the times to come. So if that's okay, I'll leave it to this, and I'm very happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, Sander. And yeah, I see that between some of our participants, there are already many questions and exchanges being raised. There are, again, many interesting things that you have referred to. And what I particularly appreciated was what you described as the desire of the EU to be treated more or less like a state. It's what we have seen actually in the EU-UK diplomatic spat regarding the treatment to be given to the EU head of delegation and the EU delegation there. And as I said in the beginning of this webinar, this spat has now been solved yesterday actually. But you also see it in other aspects of diplomatic practice of the EU since the Treaty of Lisbon. Remember, we once wrote an article about it, saying how the EU also in the ordre protocolaire nowadays likes to be treated like a state, which apparently in the past was not really the case. Now, it's high time, because we all know we have been building up pressure a little bit for le moment suprême, which is going to be the presentation by Ambassador Jacques de Banst. Mr. Ambassador, we really look forward to your, let's say, reflections from a protocol point of view. And we are going to serve a PowerPoint presentation to help you out. I hope it all works out also with the microphone. The floor is yours. Thank you. We don't hear you, Mr. de Banst.
Yeah, I forgot to switch it on. Well, thank you very much. Good morning to all who take part in this webinar. Yes, I prepared a certain large number of remarks. The first one comes here on the screen. It's true that we have an order of precedence between institutions of the EU, and that order exists since already 1958. It's the order in which, on the first Treaty of Rome, the institutions were mentioned. It was a meeting of heads of protocol of the institutions of responsible who said, now we need to fix some rules and let's take the treaty, and they followed the treaty. Then the same came, that's for slide 2, then came the same for the order of precedence between dignitaries of the institution. As the parliament is first, his president comes as first, then president of the council. Then, of course, as they are heads of state, heads of government, members of the European Council, and it's expressly mentioned, including the president of the commission, thus, and then the others. I will not go too far on that, except that I disagree with the head of protocol of the council, Mr. Dominique Marot, when he said, in commenting on the Sofagate, yes, but the president of the European Council is at the level of head of state, and the president of the commission is at the level of heads of government. No, Michel, as some said, is not hierarchically superior to von der Leyen, but he is primus inter pares, thus they are of equal rank hierarchy, but he comes before. What is also interesting is that, in fact, we have that order of precedence with President of the European Parliament as first person amongst dignitaries, while in every state, it's always the head of state comes first, because sometimes I give to my students a small study and comparison of protocol order of different states, but everywhere, except probably in China, and it choose not to be necessarily the case in Soviet Union and some communist countries where the party comes first. Otherwise, it's always the head of state. It comes first before the president of legislative assemblies. There is one, sorry, I will first comment on Professor Van Eyck, who said something interesting. He said, protocol is politics. I fully agree, and I would say protocol is a message. It's a message you give, and simply you think about the opening of the parliament in London with pomp and ceremony, and it is to bring a message outside to the world. We are an important traditional country with a long history. As what has been said, the President of the Commission has certainly a role to play in the external policy of the Union. That's mentioned in Article 17, paragraph 1 of the treaty. Thus, he is counterpart of heads of state, heads of government. But to show slide 3, which is one of the pictures of family photo of the European Council. This one dates from last year to 2019. Of course, Michel is, as president of the council, in the center, but if you look on his left and on his right, you first have 5 heads of state. I numbered them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And as number 6, before Merkel and any other heads of government, comes von der Leyen. And that has been traditional since the European Council. That means that one can say she's the last of the heads of state, or the first of the prime ministers. All the others, and between the heads of state, they are positioned in order of succession of presidencies. Same for the prime minister. That's why Merkel is there. And then you have the Slovenian and then Portuguese actually prime ministers and the others. The rule is order of succession of presidencies, but distinguishing between heads of state and heads of government, and putting the president of the commission in between the two groups. One should also underline that both in Brussels or in abroad, both presidents are interlocutors to heads of state and heads of government, and they receive in Brussels separately, both receive many heads of state and many prime ministers. One more element is, of course, the format of diplomatic relations that the EU has, based on Article 17 of the Protocol on Privileges and Immunities of the European Communities, dating from 1965. The EU has passive and active legation rights. They receive ambassadors of third country. They send officials as representatives abroad with the title of ambassadors. Actually, there are, I didn't check the last figure, but at least 130 ambassadors, heads of delegations of the EU abroad, both towards states and towards international organization. The point I want to make here is that an appointment of an ambassador by a third country requires an agreement and then implies presentation of credentials. And thus, the interesting element here is that thus the credentials that are a letter addressed by a head of state to another head of state are presented, and that's a peculiarity of the Union, to both the President of the European Council and the President of the European Commission separately. And I have an example here of credentials. That's next slide, please. This one, I used to give lectures in Armenia, that's why I have that one. There's the former president of Armenia, Sargsyan, addressed himself here to José Manuel Barroso, President of the European Commission, President of the Commission of the European Communities, and it's signed by the President. The same, thus, is addressed separately to the President of the Council. Same for the letter of recall. As you know, when an ambassador leaves, he should present letters mentioning that he has been assigned to other tasks or retires, but it's always the successor that presents the letter of recall of his predecessor. Here it's from Ghana, His Excellency Flightline Jerry John Rawlings, President of the Republic of Ghana, to His Excellency Jacques Santer. It dates a bit, but okay. It's an example I found. And signed by the President, and always countersigned, like many documents, by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but presented, same letter was presented then to the President of the Council. At the time, because the dates from 1998, that was presented to the presidency, rotating presidency, just to the prime minister or head of state of the presidency of the time of the semester. Active litigation rights are based on a seat agreement, and in the letters of credence of heads of delegation of the EU to another head of state, just like a like for a bilateral ambassador, agreement is asked by the Commission for the head of or by the External Action Service to the state in question, presenting with a CV the intended head of delegation, and credentials are established once the agreement is granted, signed by both President of the Council and President of the Commission. And that distinguishes the EU from other international organizations. As mentioned by Ms. Professor Duquet, the Union wants to be recognized as like a state and not like an international organization. Thus, they present credentials, while for other organizations, ambassadors to or from other representatives from other organizations do not present credentials, do not ask for an agreement, but simply present an introduction letter to the Secretary General of the said organization or to another to a state if they want to be present in that state. Thus, the fact that credentials are signed by head of state or received by head of state indicates that the two presidents can be considered as themselves as equal to a head of state. That has been mentioned by Professor Morrow. So another point that I wanted to mention is the fact that I have a drawing here for the position on the Sofagate. That comes later. Yeah. So protocol and Sofagate. As one said, well, there are no real written rules on protocol, but mainly courtesy. Oh yes, sorry, I see here the slide on presentation of credentials, which I didn't mention. You see, to Donald Tusk and still to President Barroso separately in the office of each of the presidents. Those are simple ceremonies. There is no pump around it like you can have in some countries. Little anecdote, at the beginning, the first ambassador were received by President of the Commission, Walter Hallstein, with ushers in important uniforms, etc. And that led to strong criticism from Charles de Gaulle. He said, what is that organization that wants to act like a state or like me? Thus, then it was decided that we would have a very simple ceremony for presentation of credentials, and since then that has been the case. Let's go to the Sofagate Protocol and Sofagate. As I said, no written rules on protocol, but customary arrangements. We have, however, yes, but they are irregular, meetings of responsibles of the protocol services of the institutions. We also have meetings there only Council, Commission and Parliament are present of the protocol working group of the EU. Each presidency normally organizes one meeting and those conclusions are spread in every of the country and protocol service, and they agree on some practical rules not to overdo others, namely in the organization of visits, etc. And there is finally the vademecum for the use of diplomatic corps that one could find previously when it was still published in the vademecum and of the list of the corps diplomatic of the Commission. That is not to be found on internet as the list of missions accredited to the EU is only on internet actually. Bon. One should say, as has been mentioned by previous speakers, that many domains of competence of the Commission have foreign policy aspects. So there exists on that field also a certain interdependence between the two presidents. What had not been the case in the Sofagate, but Article 13, paragraph 2 of the Treaty of the European Union speaks of loyal cooperation between the two institutions. And in 2009, a report of the Constitutional Affairs Committee of the European Parliament, in that report one can read, it is crucial to maintain a balanced and collaborative relationship amongst these key figures, which does not always be the case. So, as has been mentioned, and also by, I can't remember which speaker, I think Professor Mauro Gatti, there is a strong desire of both actual presidents to affirm themselves vis-à-vis member states and third countries. And that is also in an article to be read in an article of Politico. And it's true, as was mentioned, that they both try to have a future after their actual term of or mandate or a term of presidency. And thus they want to mark the opinion on that. It's true that the relation between Van Rompuy or Tusk and Barroso or Juncker was much smoother, and for that at a certain moment a gentleman's agreement was established, and that should be done actually. Coming on the seating arrangements, for EU summit, traditionally both presidents are present at EU third country summits. The tradition at the table is that they sit next to each other, and you have it here on the screen. You see on below in blue, circled in blue, Herman Van Rompuy, José Manuel Barroso, sitting next to each other. We tried sometimes to have them both facing the head of state, but that's on table with microphones, as you can see, it's not always possible. So Van Rompuy sits facing Putin, and Barroso is on his right side. What is interesting and has not been respected in Turkey is that you have in the green frame 4 officials linked with the council. Thus you had there Ashton, David O'Sullivan as for EAS, and then EAS, and the principal advisor to Van Rompuy. And on the other side, you had a 2 commissioners, and then 2 officials, the ambassador, and then there's the same number of officials for each side. I must add that sometimes in my career, I had to fight for that with the council, who always wanted more seats than for the commission. And then we had sometimes strong discussions on that. But you can see that is what is normally implemented and was not implemented, thus neither, certainly not at the lunch if you read what has been written about it with taller chairs for Erdogan and for Charles Michel, and that the political advisor of President von der Leyen had to insist to be present and had to insist for her to have the same chair. Normally, to arrange all that, we have what is called an advance team. And this time, it seems, well, it's true, the Commission didn't send anyone, probably for, as they said, because of COVID and difficulty of traveling. But normally you send what is called an advance party, and on each side you have someone from protocol, someone from security, and someone from, often from the media. And often I had, for example, myself to go in advance of President Barroso abroad to prepare and to check the rooms and everything. Well, the point is that there was time for preparation for the Turkey-EU summit. It was not an emergency meeting where you could understand that no one lives there in advance. And it's, if one think of the agenda, once one of the speakers spoke of migration trade, those topics on the agenda were of the responsibility of both, some for Charles Michel, others for President von der Leyen, and then you had common points, common topics of common competences. It's certainly a mistake of the Commission not to have sent an advance team, but it was in fact planned as a very brief encounter, half a day, no more than that. They said probably it's not necessary to have that. And as was rightly mentioned by Professor Duquet, thus the role of the EU delegation should have been a better implication. Delegation should have been involved, but it seems, according to articles, that they have been put aside. If you read what the head of delegation said, they were not involved, not informed. The error of the Commission certainly was that they didn't ask enough information from delegation and did not insist, if the protocol was not present, to have more information on the practical aspects of the event. What I wanted to show us also is that if you have an advance party, seating arrangements are often communicated in advance and drafted in advance, and one has a list of participants to each element for the visit, and that is also established before the beginning. Even up to who sits where. You have that here for the summit EU-Russia. You have another example, if I can have next slide. No, that's something different. Okay, but that's this one. If you see, we had this meeting between George W. Bush. It's a bit, I drafted it myself in 2005, where everyone should see it with numbers. You can see the numbers, but you have this on the top with the seats, President Barroso already, and President Bush next to him, and then ABCD, the American delegation, 1, 2, 3, 4, the EU, the Commission participants with commissioners and officials. Thus that everyone knew exactly, and everyone had agreed on where to sit. One interesting element in this drawing, and I had to ask twice to the Americans, is that, and you can't see it, but A was the seat reserved for the ambassador to the EU, while B was for the Secretary of State, which is in our traditional order of precedence is not the case. The Minister of Foreign Affairs comes before the ambassador. The Americans said, no, he's appointed and represents the president. Then argument said, yeah, but the president is there, so it doesn't represent him. No, we want him before. And I've seen that, and it's mentioned like that in the president's order of the United States. Simple little anecdote. Now, yeah, you could see it in the previous slide. There's that photos in Brussels and in Turkey, both in Brussels, both in the second one was in Antalya on the occasion of the G20 of 2015. They sit on the first one, Erdogan on the right of President Tusk, and then President Juncker on the other side. When it's in Turkey, Erdogan, and that should have been the case now in the Sofagate with Tusk on one side and Juncker on the other side. So now, consideration about the meeting. The reaction, how should they have reacted in my view? The reaction of surprise and slight irritation of Mrs. von der Leyen was, in my view, totally normal, and she did not overplay the situation, which is fine. But of course, as we all know and said, she should have been seated exactly like Michel. But it's difficult for her to say, no, I don't sit here, I want to sit. So maybe I think that President Charles Michel should have asked for it, or at least should have mentioned to Erdogan that normally she is seated next to him or at the same level of he. What is certainly not acceptable and was mentioned by President Morugati is that she sat facing the Minister of Foreign Affairs, which is absolutely not her level. Thus, that is totally not acceptable because that diminishes her to ministerial level. Now, it's difficult to determine according to even because the comments were very different coming either from the council or from other actors or persons concerned. But the Turks say it's the council who has discussed in advance with us on the situation, and we have done what they wanted. I'm not sure that's the reality, but I know sometimes that we had as Commission to fight with the Council to have certain elements accepted and respected. On the lunch, it seems the Council, as I said, downplayed, was it intentionally, the participation of the Commission by those. There were 4 head of delegation and there's 2 of the council and then President von der Leyen. It's not normal that she should not have had at least an advisor or someone next to her. And as I showed you in the EU-Russia drawing, that normally you have the same number of officials for both sides, and we were always very attentive to that. Thus the reaction of the diplomatic advisor of von der Leyen was totally right. She should have had the same seat and have had advisors next to her or officials next to her. Now the comments on the reaction to the incident. What I would say is that I consider that the wording and the elements of the excuses of President Michel in the press and at the Parliament were rather weak. To use this, to comment about the respect of women, mention of his mother and grandmother, like he did in Hélène 24, when he was interviewed there a few days after. That's not relevant, I'd say. I would say that I didn't appreciate really the remarks made by President von der Leyen addressed to the Parliament, to the European Parliament, because for me, gender discrimination, and there I'm in contradiction with, I can't remember who mentioned that, sorry. Gender discrimination is not the best argument, even if you can easily have a tendency to suspect the Turkish president of unequal treatment of partners based on their gender. Why is that not the best argument? Because, of course, in social life, and I am fully in favor of equality of treatment and of no gender discrimination, of course, but in social life, you take gender into consideration. In official events, much less. Participants at an official event are ranked according to their function, according to the precedence accorded to their function. And you see that in the photo of the European Council, family photo of the European Council that we showed before. Men and women are put in a specific order, presidents, or the succession order of presidencies, and not women because they are first, because there are women. There is no gender specification or gender distinction made there. So I would say in conclusion, if, as we said, protocol is a message, protocol plays an indirect but important role in official relations, and that should certainly not be neglected. What is very, very unfortunate is that the event has damaged the image of the EU in third countries, and also the image of both presidents amongst the leaders of the EU. That is really a problem. I'm sure that the Commission President will in the future add a protocol official to its delegation and send him in advance. Now, to comment on some fusion of protocol services, I don't think would that easily be done. It's not that easy because each one has many tasks. And let's say the Belgian example, you have a protocol for the court, protocol for foreign affairs, protocol for defense, protocol for the interior ministry. Thus, you already have 4 protocols in a country like Belgium, and I don't speak of protocol of the regions and communities, which have also a small protocol service. Here, it is not, wouldn't be easy because first the tasks are numerous, or you need to have a lot, and then you respond to fact. If I am the head of protocol of a joint protocol service, who do I listen to first? President of the Council, President of the Commission, President of the Parliament, because one should not forget that Parliament has an important protocol service too. Thus, I don't think it's easy, but of course you need cooperation. That is essential, and that should be much more stressed. Thus, combination of 2 presidents, yeah, well, it would be a very nice idea. It's a very nice idea. I am fully in favor of it, but well, member states will not accept that before long time. So in conclusion, I think that the Council should respect the position of the President of the Commission, and that a gentleman's agreement between the two organizations and between their two leaders is totally essential, not only for the external image of the EU, but also for the good cooperation and smooth functioning of the institution, because you have too much rivalry in between the services of the institution. And if one does that, and that was mentioned in one of the articles, if you try to fix such a gentleman's agreement, actually the point will be that the legal directorates or legal services of Council of Commission will probably disagree on that, and that will be a compromise, a very weak compromise. We have seen that in before the Treaty of Lisbon. At certain time after the Treaty of Maastricht, the Council insisted, we are the Council of the European Union. And the Commission always used to say, we are the Commission of the European Communities, because the Union still has no legal personality and has only legal personality since Lisbon. Because now there is no discussion about it, but that was one point of strong discussions between the two legal services of the institutions. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ambassador De Baenst, for what has actually become a lecture about protocol. And
sorry.
No. On the contrary, we are grateful. As I have said before, you have a unique expertise, so many decades of experience, and so it was really an eye-opener to discover the world of protocol, and especially the European Union practices in this respect. And again, all the illustrations you gave were extremely insightful. So thank you so much. Dear colleagues, we now come to the kind of interactive part. I always enjoy those webinars. We still have half an hour or a bit more to address questions. Obviously, you among yourselves should be free to comment or react to some of the statements that each of you has made. I may ask you maybe to do that first, but let me also indicate that we really want the participants to share questions with us. I have received some of those questions, and I'm going to put them in a certain order to you. But before doing that, let's just within the panel give the possibility to react. There has been a lot of concordance, but there has also been some disagreement. And let me basically also to all of you already formulate the almost obvious question. When it was mentioned that the Commission, in a certain way, I noted the words mistake, I noted the words error that Ambassador De Baenst used with the Commission not sending an advance team for the Ankara summit. Even if that is the case, even if there was a regrettable error or mistake, we still have, as Ambassador De Baenst also mentioned, Article 13, paragraph 2 of the EU Treaty, which basically mentions the principle of sincere cooperation, but applied between the institutions. So it is literally said that the institutions shall practice mutual sincere cooperation. So in that sense, the protocol people of the Council who were there at the meeting should actually have taken that situation of the Commission into account, n'est-ce pas? Or am I misreading the principle of sincere cooperation? It's just one quick consideration. Can I see within the panel if there is somebody who would like to react to one or the other of the interventions? Professor Van Hekke, please.
Yeah, just very briefly, not to further exhaust the audience. We cannot see the chat, so Jan, we rely on you for passing through their questions. Merger. So merging the president of the Commission and the President of the European Council is, of course, not something one should do without second thoughts. It changes the soft architecture of the top executive of the EU without treaty change. But mixing communitarian with intergovernmental is not a unique thing. It already exists within the position of the High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. So therefore, in Dutch we say de bal terugkaatsen, for those who are the real experts like you as far as EU foreign policy is concerned. So of course it would be an overall change without changing the treaty, but it would not be a precedent. So I think as a political scientist, that's my comfort zone. I'm not a lawyer. As a political scientist, I think it's worth, at least we should consider it, and it's perhaps even worth trying it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure if any of the other panel members would, at this stage, like to react either to this statement of Steven or to any of the other points made earlier. I look around. Ambassador De Baenst or Mauro? Mauro, you raise your hand, please.
Yeah.
I just wanted to reply to your reference to Article 13, paragraph 2. Obviously, I think you're right. There should have been loyal cooperation between the Council and the Commission, but we know that in practice, Article 13, paragraph 2 is not always respected to the letter. So I'm not really surprised that these kind of incidents might happen from time to time. And this is precisely the reason, by the way, why institutional solutions have been developed in order to avoid this kind of problems at different levels. The High Representative, as already been mentioned, has been created precisely to avoid problems created by failure to cooperate. The External Action Service was created for this reason, and I think that coordinating also protocols might serve to avoid, let's say, this application of Article 13 in the practice.
Thank you. Ambassador De Baenst.
Yes, first to Professor Van Eck, yes, but what you dream of is an ideal world. I dream of it too, but okay. Secondly, you mentioned, Professor Gatti, you mentioned EAS, but there are conflicts within EAS because don't forget, EAS is composed of officials, of diplomats from the member states, officials from the council, and officials of the commission. And there are a lot of tensions. Just one example, between diplomats from on secondment to the EAS and officials of the commission. The status is totally different because diplomats of member states have generally a diplomatic passport, while the others have a laissez-passer. And that brings sometimes some difficulties. Already heard about that. Okay, but that's one side aspect. But still, EAS, yes, respond to both, but it's not always easy.
Thank you. I'm looking at Sandra to see if she would like to add something. Yes?
Yes, Professor Waters, I actually forgot to reply to your question. The question you posed me, I realized afterwards. I do think that there's a difference between the Sofagate incident and using protocol as a political sign. The previous speakers have also mentioned that protocol is actually a very powerful political tool, and denying or not replying to an invitation or not inviting someone yourself is in protocol terms probably is much more of a political sign, something to get something or to arrive at a certain result. We have seen it too with the diplomatic spat that you were referring to between the EU and the UK, when the UK was still in doubt whether it would grant Vienna Convention immunities to the EU delegation in London. We also saw that at a certain point, Charles Michel refused to see the British ambassador in Brussels, which was at that time a very powerful sign to the UK, saying, I don't want to talk to you if you don't recognize us as a full-grown diplomatic actor. So I think this is something that we will also always see as just the use of protocol in order to obtain a result, a political result. It's probably a bit different than making an error, a protocol error that leads to unwanted results, as we've seen with the Sofagate.
Thank you. Now I'm going to fire to you a number of questions from our participants, and I will just bundle some of these questions so you can, in a way, try to answer them in a combined manner. There was a question with regard to the Turkish side, because of course we don't have a representative from the Turkish side here. But the question is, can there be any other explanation, for instance, carelessness or unawareness? Has any research been done on the question of the Turkish side? For instance, what has been written in Turkish media, what has been the reaction, or what is the attitude of Turkish politicians in the domestic context, and so on. So it would be nice to also take a little bit that Turkish, say, dimension into account. I think there is another question that let's say has to do with the political or diplomatic side. It's the following thing, and I hope I can mention the author of the question. It's our colleague Professor Kolja Raube, who said, you know, we have now seen the Moscow visit of the High Representative, Vice President Borrell. We have seen the visit of those presidents to Ankara, and we saw it and we experienced it as a kind of failure of high-level diplomacy. And what does this tell us about the EU's current abilities and let's say real capacity to act as a real strategic foreign policy actor? Could it be, it's a question, could it be that the EU underestimates the importance of high-level diplomacy and concentrates basically or prioritizes other tools of EU diplomacy? And in a way, what we are witnessing, how do you reconcile that with what is currently highlighted, the geopolitical ambitions of the European Union? That's one thing. And then maybe just as a third remark or question to add to the discussion, lots of references and comparisons were made with, let's say, states. The EU wanted to be treated as a state, but as Ambassador de Baenst has indeed highlighted, the EU is set up in a very different manner from a state. In fact, Professor Van Hekke said that too. And the fact is, as we know, also legally speaking, Article 15, paragraph 6, the President of the European Council can only represent the EU externally with regard to CFSP. Does that as such make the comparison to heads of state not much weaker, that the President of the European Council can only discuss CFSP matters and not the other matters, as we know, which are in principle then for the President of the Commission? So a bit of a divergent set of questions, but I would like you to engage with it. Can I maybe just go again in the order of the speakers and ask Professor Van Hekke to react first? Thank you.
Yes, sure, Jan. Thank you very much. I will comment on the first part of your kind of series of questions, which is Turkish politics. I'm not a specialist really in Turkish. I don't master the language, so I'm a bit reluctant. But even if you don't know the country, if you don't know the politics, what happened, this protocol incident, if it's deliberate, then it's shameless anyway, and then it needs to be condemned. If it's not a deliberate, then it's amateuristic, because also the meeting lasted for 2 hours, and apparently there were also problems with the seating during the lunch or the dinner afterwards. So I think in both ways, in both senses, the Turkish attitude is reproachable. So I was very critical towards Charles and Michel. I think he made a mistake. His immediate political reflex, so to say, should have helped him, and it didn't do what it should do. But of course, the same applies to Turkey too. I'm also very critical as far as the Turkish side is concerned. Whether they organized it or not, in both ways, I think it was unnecessarily damaging and they need to be held accountable. Thank you.
Did you want to say something about Kolya's question, Steven, with regard to the high-level diplomacy thing? No? Not really?
No,
okay.
It's a very interesting question and too difficult for me. And I'm looking forward to see the answers of the other panel members. Thank you very much, Jan.
Okay, thank you. Mauro, you come next.
Thank you. I will then take the reference to the comparison to heads of state and the President of the European Council. Of course, I don't think that you can make an argument that officials of the Union might be compared exactly to officials of states, because the Union is not a state, of course. Therefore, I agree with Ambassador de Bans when he says that the argument of the Council Protocol that the President of the European Council will be, of course, a head of state, whereas the President of the European Commission will be head of government. I agree with he is finding that this kind of assumption is incorrect. In what we can say, the only thing that we can say is that when the European Union participates in meetings at the level of heads of state and government, the only persons that can speak on behalf of the Union are the President of the Commission and the President of the European Council, which means that they have the rank of heads of state and government. But that is, as far as I can see, the only thing that we can say. Whether they are heads of state or government, that is very, well, debatable, to say the very least.
Okay. Mauro, could I kindly remind you of my earlier question, the constitutional law status of the President of the European Commission? Quit.
You're right. Sorry, I forgot about that. I think that to answer your question, you have to take into account paragraphs 2 and 6 of Article 15. Paragraph 2 stipulates that the President of the European Commission is a member of the European Council. Therefore, you can argue that implicitly Article 15 is given the President of the Commission some status comparable to the other members of the European Council, which means that when the European Commission represents the Union at the level of head of state and government in summits, the only member of the Commission that can actually speak should be the only one that is comparable to the members of the European Council, hence the President of the Commission. Having said that, the fact remains that the European Commission has the power to speak on behalf of the Union, always, with a few exceptions. No exception is made for representation at the level of head of state and government in general. There is only one exception regarding the CFSP. This means that the Commission can, by definition, speak on behalf of the Union at the level of head of state and government. And I don't really see any reason why anyone else other than the President of the Commission should speak in these cases.
Okay, thank you.
That answers your question.
Thank you, thank you. We turn now to Dr. Duque. Sanderijn?
Thank you. If you'll allow me, I'll try to tackle Professor Raube's question, although as a lawyer, I may not be able to go into the depths of all the political reflections that there also may be. But I do think that the EU has always been stronger in its diplomacy behind the scenes, working a bit more quietly, the silent diplomacy than perhaps the more open, high-level events, the diplomacy. And perhaps this is also to do with the fact that still in the EU, we don't have this diplomacy of personalities. It's very different from, let's say, some member states that have presidents that are very, very well known publicly, or the US president that everyone knows. It's still a bit different for the EU. So perhaps it's also a bit counterintuitive to put those personalities in a place that comes natural to them. So this is what I wanted to say about the high politics. Perhaps the EU should continue doing what it's really good at, and that's probably something that we are not highlighting today. But in general, and I've mentioned this before, I think the EU has a strong diplomatic service, and these kind of the incident that we're discussing now shouldn't take away from that.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Ambassador de Bans, but I would like to maybe just add a little provocative question for you, Ambassador De Baenst. It's the following thing. And again, it's not my personal thinking. I play a little bit the devil's advocate. And it's a comparison between pre-Lisbon and post-Lisbon arrangements. Pre-Lisbon, as you have shown on your pictures, we had the President of the Commission, and we had a non-permanent President of the European Council, the rotating presidency, right? Every 6 months, somebody else. Then we had the convention, of course, and we had the constitutional treaty and then the Lisbon Treaty, which basically has made a full-time function of the European Council president. Remember, the magistral move of Giscard d'Estaing at the European Convention. It was his idea, which initially, besides, was not very warmly welcomed by countries like Belgium and so on. In any event, that's the situation post-Lisbon, those two permanent presidents, both in Brussels, receiving the, let's say, heads of state and governments of third countries, and so on and so forth. My little question, and it's actually a bit of a naughty question, is, was the pre-Lisbon system not much more in favor of the Commission president, because he, it was always a he, at least in that period, was permanently in Brussels and would receive probably alone the heads of state of third countries and so on, because, yeah, the rotating European Council president may probably not always be available to fly to Brussels to shake hands with those high-level visits people. So paradoxically, could we say that the pre-Lisbon system of external representation was more for, let's say, to the advantage of the representative of the community method of the president of the European Commission? I'm sorry when I hijacked my position to impose this question on you, but it sometimes makes me think, did we really improve matters with the Lisbon Treaty? Please, Ambassador.
Thank you for that. Provocative, yes, no, I'm not so sure it's provocative, but I would agree with you from my expertise, because in fact, I had to retire due to age in 2010, so I had very little experience with Lisbon Treaty implementation within the Commission, only the preparation and the first months. But it's true that if one consider pre-Lisbon and post-Lisbon for the President of the Commission, the activity was certainly totally different, because, as you rightly said, the President of the Commission was receiving plenty of heads of state, heads of government. They eventually went to the Parliament. Sometimes they met the rotating presidency in the head of state or prime minister capacity, when that one was in Brussels, but very rare were the facts, the moments when that president coming from one of the member states was present in Brussels, or came especially for such meetings, of course. Thus, President of the Commission has lost a certain part of his, how would I say, aura in that after Lisbon, because he has to share that one with the President of the Council, of the President of the Council. That's my answer to you. To answer to on the comment on Turkish side, I fully agree with Professor Van Heck, and to illustrate that, one has to look at the pictures taken at the arrival of both presidents, where Erdogan waits on top of the stairs, and then on the photo has President Michel on the right side and President von der Leyen on the other side, thus on equal, I would say, between the two. And then in the room, it's no more that situation that one sees. But at the entrance, in the formal arrival photo, that is the case. They are all three on the stairs.
Ambassador,
yes?
can I quickly ask you the following thing? I have read somewhere that even that picture was because of the insistence of the diplomatic advisor of the Commission president that they would be on equal terms. So, I mean, I'm not sure if the chronology was that this was taken beforehand or afterwards. I do not know. But I read somewhere that even there, it was because of pressure from the advisor of the Commission president that this equality was respected, at least on the picture. Did you see similar messages or not?
No, I didn't see those messages. The only thing is it's clearly on arrival that that photo is taken. Because you see them coming from cars at the entrance, and Erdogan is waiting on top of the stairs for them. There is another point in protocol. Do you wait on top of the stairs, or do you come towards your counterpart, I would say? And I have interesting pictures on that on the stairs of the Elysee. And that's, as I said, protocol is a message. Either I go and to welcome my visitor, or I wait for him to come to me. That is clearly a message, and I tell that sometimes to my students.
Can we ask you what is the better protocol practice then? Descending from the stairs or waiting?
It depends of the message you want to pass. For example, I have two photos in mind. One is just on the stairs of the Elysee. The president of Iraq, in the past time, is welcomed at his car. Enfin, the French President Hollande goes to the car, while for the president of, I think was Gabon, he waits on top of the stairs. That message is La France-Afrique, that's over, in a certain sense. That is my illustration. On the EU treaty stairs, Professor Gatti mentioned, yes, but the only point that we have, the EU want to be treated with states, why member states have abandoned part of their sovereignty on trade, etc. And thus, that is why they can also, there's an element to be considered as the institution can be considered as equal to a state. That's my comment on that, but I don't know, the legal aspect of it, I wouldn't discuss.
Thank you very much. I know Professor Van Hekke would like to take the floor, but before doing that, and a quick reaction, you speak about the member states having, in a way, abandoned some of their sovereignty. For quite a number of member states, it's not an abandonment, it's just a form of, let's say, common exercise of sovereignty, of pooling of sovereignty, if you want. And I guess that for some political sides, this is a sensitive type of issue, of course, as you can imagine. But that's just a side comment. Professor Van Hekke, you wanted to react.
Yes, very briefly, commenting on the comments of Ambassador Jacques de Banst, who I thought was really interesting. I would like to attend a webinar on the stepping stones towards the entrance of the Elysee, but that's maybe for another time and for those who are the real nerds in politics. But it also points to the essence of protocol. I think protocol should be like God, everywhere but invisible. So it should make things happen smoothly, to avoid embarrassment and to respect everyone in his or her position. If you need to talk about protocol like we do, then it shows that there was a problem. Thank you.
That's a very nice statement. You would agree, Mr. Banst?
Yeah, I would totally agree. I can simply add that I used to give at a certain moment a 1-hour seminar on family photos and the message that can be given through photos or pictures.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to make sure that both Dr. Duquet and Dr. Gatti, do you have immediate points you would like to still intervene on? Because we're slowly going towards the end of our webinar, but I have a little question also from the audience that looks at the future, and it's actually something which has already been hinted to by Professor Van Hekke. It's the conference on the future of Europe, which has now basically already started, at least on the platform, which officially, of course, will be kicked off on Europe Day. But there, the question is indeed, Professor Van Hekke was putting apparently some hopes on discussions among citizens at the level of the conference on the future of Europe. But we also know that this conference has had a little bit of a difficult start. If you see the time it took to find consensus between the three main institutions, about the actual setup, the mandate, and so on and so forth. So I'm actually not sure to what extent indeed the conference on the future of Europe would be able to come up with proposed solutions. But can I ask you maybe to each of the speakers, so what exactly, if you think the conference on the future of Europe would be a good platform to discuss these types of issues, broadly speaking, not technical issues of protocol, but the system that we currently have for the external representation at the highest level, I would include it also with regard to the High Representative. We haven't touched too much upon him, but I remember Professor Van Hecke mentioning the two-headed or three-headed dimension of the High Representative. Also, that is a product of the Lisbon Treaty, and also there the question is, does that function well? Okay, but so do you think this is a matter indeed to be broadly discussed by the conference on the future of Europe, the external representation issue, or should the conference rather focus on other less legal issues, such as, for instance, the geopolitical ambitions of the European Union, whether we want to really also become a global actor in other fields such as health governance after COVID-19 and so on and so forth. So let me ask you that question, and let's maybe go a little bit in a different order now. I'll start with Sandra.
Thank you. I thought I had a bit more time to reflect on this difficult question, but okay. My first instinct is actually that the conference should focus on more substantive matters. I don't see any point in discussing these kind of things that risk to open lots of other questions. And I do think that the EU has other things to worry about, and that, you know, the representation of those policies comes second when there are so many other things that the EU should or could be focusing on. Its role in the world, that's I think much more of a hot topic than this protocol or the representation in external relations should be.
Okay, thank you. I should maybe try to also refine a little bit my question in the following sense. There's a lot of talk about this exercise of the conference on the future of Europe to enhance and to deepen the democratic legitimacy of the European Union. And let me put it in that perspective, maybe also, not just the question of the merger of the two functions, President of the European Council, President of the European Commission, but also a little bit the question of, let's say, the democratic position and legitimization or accountability of those two presidents. Would it make sense to ask for a form of direct election of those two functions if they remain two functions? Would that make sense to enhance their, let's say, visibility and their, let's say, mandate and legitimacy, as answered after the question of Kolja Raube? Sandra rightly highlighted the fact that the EU is not that, you know, good at this high-level diplomacy because we simply don't have those well-known figures who can stand side to side to, say, people like Vladimir Putin and Joseph Biden, to just give two rather different examples. So would you think that indeed from the point of view of democratic legitimation, the conference could make a contribution also with regard to those two high-level representatives? Let me turn to Mauro now.
Well, in my view, certainly it would be desirable to have an election of the President of the European Commission. The Spitzenkandidat mechanism, in my view, was somehow efficient, but, well, we have to accept the fact that some member states are not enthusiastic about it. So I'm not very positive about any development in this sense, I fear. But paradoxically, I think that incidents such as the Sofagate might have also positive outcomes, in the sense that for once they allow citizens to actually see who's doing what. This was probably the first case when my students, who normally are not very into EU politics, came to me asking about the Sofagate, about von der Leyen, and the years past, it was not like that. Nobody even knew who the president of the European Commission was. So although these incidents are certainly negative per se, they might have some positive outcome in the end.
That's great, great message. Thank you, Mauro. May I ask Ambassador De Baenst to share his thoughts, the conference on the future of Europe?
I'm not really a specialist on those elements. Majority voting versus one point that should be discussed at that moment in the conference is majority voting versus unanimity. We should go to more fields that would be decided on majority voting. Democratic legitimacy or accountability, yes, but through direct election, I have some doubts personally. How do you imagine a candidate from, let's say, Malta, Luxembourg, Belgium, to campaign and to be elected? Most of the people, most of the citizens, I would say, use a Flemish expression, Jan met de pet, doesn't care at all on Europe and most of what has been decided. They say the Sofagate would have said yes, would have said, okay, you see, they can't agree and it's stupid. And that's it. And they don't understand the elements. And that's why I think on the second level, and you see that also election on the second level is probably still better, despite the fact that I dream of a large Europe united, etc. But you see that in the European Parliament elections, how many, while it's possible, how many persons of nationality that is not the one of the country that gives his vote have been elected. In Italy, yes. Now I can't remember which party, but elected, I think some Dutch, or I can't remember, to the European Parliament. That has happened once or twice, but not really, not very often. You vote for those you know, or for your compatriots, and not for others. And that's my doubt about direct elections.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Now the final word is for the eminent political science expert among us, Professor Van Hecke. Your expectations of the conference on the future of Europe.
That's too kind, and also tricky, but thank you, Jan. On the direct election of the Commission President, I'm happy to send my proposals to Ambassador De Baenst, maybe to convince him I'm in favor because of several reasons. And I think the following order is a reverse. You first elect someone and then it becomes important, not the other way around. The European Parliament first needs to be directly elected to increase its power and competences, not the other way around. On the conference on the future of Europe, that's certainly worth a topic for another webinar, but I will be very brief and related to foreign affairs. It's deliberate. It's the conference asks also to discuss the foreign affairs of the EU, but of course the agenda is so broad and the initiative is so ambiguous. It will certainly resonate among the citizens panels, I think, because there I think it's a good way to discuss the global ambitions of the EU, but it will certainly also be discussed by the politicians, for instance, and there I agree with the ambassadors. Perhaps it's time to move from unanimity to qualified and majority voting, at least in some areas of foreign affairs of the EU. And therefore, also in this way, Sofagate might have been helpful after all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, we are at the end of our webinar. It's 1 o'clock. We have to really close here. We learned a lot, I think. It was a very dense webinar. We learned a lot from protocol. We learned that, yes, protocol is politics. We learned that protocol is a message, that it is also communication. And we even had an analogy with God. So that I think we learned a great number of things about EU external representation as well. I would really like to thank our eminent speakers and also you, the audience, for asking so many interesting questions. I also was very happy to note Professor Gatti's point about the fact that Sofagate also triggered positive interests with our students and with other people about, yes, the system of EU high external representation. So let us try to conclude on this positive note. And let me just also flag the following thing, since we mentioned the conference on the future of Europe and the need for further webinars. I can tell you already that on the 10th of May, we are organizing a webinar with the Reconnect project and the conference on the future of Europe on the question on how to overcome the European Union's legitimacy concerns. So you can definitely sign up to that webinar yourself as well. Thank you again to all of you. Really very happy and grateful for sharing your great expertise with us. And to the audience, thank you. And I hope you will stay signed up for future webinars of our Leuven Center or of the EU Diplo project. Stay tuned, stay healthy and safe, and have a very good day. Bye to you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.